can, and those questions and for Julian, and do those in a manner that we can be respectful and get to some really good information and get out of this meeting with some information that you can take back to your teams. So I will, I guess maybe Julian, instead of everybody just asking questions out, maybe we put them in the chat box. And if they want to speak, you can just mark the thing, raise your hand, and Trish and I are both monitoring it, and Tammy. So we're going to make sure that everybody gets to speak that wants to or talk. So Julian, if you want to start off just telling a little bit about how you got to the point where you are and how we are where we are.
Well, thanks, Nancy. Obviously, we didn't volunteer for this role, but Senator Wise came to us very early in the session, indicated this bill was going to be proposed, and indicated that, as they say, when you monitor the legislature, it had a little traction. I'm not sure any of us realized how much traction it had before any of us object things too loudly. Let's remember it got 6 no votes combined in the 2 chambers. So that's probably a worthy exclamation point on the bill. So we're trying to make it work. We waited purposely until KDE came out with their guidance. And we know that everybody's talking about the timing of their guidance, and we don't work directly for KDE. So that's their issue. But we know that they are still, based on your all's feedback from the districts, they're still revising their guidance. You all know that. If you've been in on the calls the last couple of days with both the KASA call and yesterday with the state superintendent's call, I mean, people are coming up with what ifs that didn't come up during the legislature. So we're trying to address them. Superintendent Schlosser from Simpson County and I had a great talk this morning, and he brings up a couple of issues that I'll preemptively bring up this morning that you all probably have already talked about. And I've had a number of conversations with our superintendents. Chad's on here with us, and he keeps up with the lawyer side of it and talking to a couple of different councils for different boards. You know, this is one of those crazy things where nobody envisioned it would happen. But Senate Bill 128 is colloquially called a do-over bill. And let me tell you where we approached it from the get-go, from listening to Senator Wise, that this is an opportunity not to give people new opportunities, but to give them an opportunity to do 2021 over again. And I think that's important for all of us as we look at this. We know that there was some admitted inadequacies that we all faced, and we're trying to, this was Senator Wise's way of, and the legislature's way of trying to compensate for that. We can, years from now, we'll argue about it. And just a few years from now, Nancy and I will sit and have a glass of tea and have a lot of uncensored comments about it that we have to censor right now. So that will definitely happen at some point. What we have done is try to take what KDE puts out and add on to it. We are trying very much not to contradict their guidance. I know that was a problem last summer with some of the school day guidance that came out compared to athletics guidance. We've tried as best we can, but I think those of you that were on yesterday's call know that some of their answers are probably going to change in the next 24 hours. And particularly the part that we cannot answer is what is academically supplementing. And that's the biggest part of the bill that there's still a lot of confusion about. Trish, I'm going to assume that I can share. So what I want to do, I think I'm going to try this. No, I've disabled. Okay. I wanted to.
No, you're good.
Should be able to now.
Yep.
That's perfect. I just want to walk through to make sure that our attendees understand the structure. You should see the post that we've got out. We have deliberately put this out as a post that can be edited very quickly because we know there are going to be changes. Trying to make that big enough for Mr. Saylor to read. So I think we've got it. But in addition to all the stuff that we copied, we do cross-reference their guidance. And I'll keep a list in here for our superintendents of any time we've changed things. We made our first changes to the document yesterday. actually polished up one change this morning. We had a long talk yesterday with both KDE and KHEAA about some confusion that's out there among our schools about the school day guidance for dual enrolled, dual credit, and the differences between those. And we know you all have a lot more issues with that than we do. The bottom line for us is students have to be enrolled full time. So we've kind of stripped our guidance of anything related to dual enrolled and dual credit. And we're leaving that argument for our districts with our State Department of Education. We have several rules that are impacted. So let me kind of walk through them really quickly, and then we'll come back and get to questions if we can. Bylaw 2 is our rule on age, but it is also a state law on age. And that rule was not waived. There are no waivers of the 19-year-old restriction on age. If you know from the statute itself, as Mr. Crawford, Mr. Collins can tell you, there is a statutory waiver, but that's for things that occur in the primary through third grade, not something that occurred at the point in time we're dealing with. So nothing in this bill waived the age rule. Consequently, nothing in this rule waives the age rule that's in the state regulation on middle school participation. And that's important for you all to know in your districts. You're going to get questions from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade parents about repeating grades. And a lot of these kids are in areas that they've already repeated at least once. So you're going to get real close to hitting that 15-year-old restriction for 8th grade competition or 14-year-old restriction for 7th grade competition. Nothing about this bill waived the age restrictions. Those are all health and safety based, not pandemic based. So just wanted to point that out. Within 2, specifically in the bill within our bylaw 3, which you have for the rest of our rules, for most of the rest of our rules, they are rules passed by the schools, approved by the General Assembly, and incorporated by reference as state regulation. All these bylaws are state regulation. So we don't have a whole lot of flexibility to just arbitrarily set them aside, but we want to be sure we've addressed each of them. 3 is the number of years. Normally that is 4 years from the time a student enrolls in the 9th grade. That was specifically waived by this bill to give kids 5 years to play 4 that are currently impacted. So basically we're going to live with the consequence of that provision for another 3 years after this, because everybody involved who takes advantage of this SSYP year is going to basically get 5 years to play 4. It will not impact the kids below the 8th grade who are repeating, because their 4-year count hasn't started anyway. Okay, so it does have a shelf life of 4 years. So we're going to have to keep that in mind as we go forward, particularly if any of you all or any of us on the call aren't around in 4 years. You'll need to remember this. This will continue on. Okay. Bylaw 4 is where some of the changes occurred both yesterday and this morning. We continue to try to fine tune the dilemma that you all are facing with dual enrolled and dual credit. The bottom line is that to be eligible to participate in athletics, you have to be enrolled in 4 classes, and passing them all because of another rule. But you got to be enrolled in 4 full classes. Now, where this gets complex and where Senate Bill 128 made a change is previously that was credits applicable to a transcript. Now it also includes those credits that are supplemental to what was taken in 2020-21. And unfortunately, we can't give you all those answers because I think, as you heard yesterday, those answers continue to evolve at our Department of Education. I think when I believe it was Meredith got on a call late yesterday and mentioned that whether something is supplemental or additional for a math class might be different than it is for an English class, might be different than it is for a science class. And I do think they're coming up with more guidance, but we can't answer that. All we're saying is it's got to be applicable to the transcript or applicable to the supplemental instruction part of this bill. And it's got to be 4 hours. Now, one thing that you'll want to keep in mind, because if I'm Mr. Sprinkles at Knox County or I'm Mr. Saylor at Estill County, I might get, and any of you might, I'm just picking you because I see the names, but you might have a kid who is their primary interest related to this is sports. Now, we hope that's not the majority, but there's going to be some that is the primary interest. And maybe they want to play spring sport, but not a fall. We've tried to mention that you've got to remember that there's several rules coming together about enrollment. So I can't, for example, lay out of school this fall and not go to school in the fall of 21 and come back and play baseball in the spring of 22 because I had to have been enrolled the previous semester as well. So for some that might be worried about people taking over advantage of this, there's some safeguards built in to the existing rules to keep you from just laying at home and not doing anything and then coming back for the baseball season. Same thing theoretically for the fall sports. They had to have been enrolled this semester. About all 4 is detailed in there for you to walk through with your athletic people, your principal, your superintendent, et cetera. About all 5 is the academic rule. And we basically have already, I got board approval last summer to suspend our first day credit check during the COVID crisis. We will be suspending it again next year. There's literally no way you're going to be able to legally allow kids to repeat and then hold them to a set number of credits to be in that other grade. It's just not going to match up. But the districts will have to come up with a way, and it's going to be local control, that you view the students as on schedule to graduate. That is the base requirement. What you had before was a mathematical check. You could take the number of credits that your student requires to graduate, multiply by 20%. If they're at that threshold, they are continuing to be eligible for that second year, 45% for that third year, and 70% for that senior year, fourth year. Well, now for the next 4 years, junior and senior and all these designations are just mixed up with these SSYP kids. So you're going to have to come up with something that you and your board feel comfortable measures that these students are continuing to make progress. I have jokingly said, but it's pretty serious. I said this to Mr. Coldiron one day. What we're trying to prevent, we're trying to allow what the bill intended while preventing Spicoli from Fast Times on Ridgemont High from sitting in your class with his feet propped up and ordering a pizza. We're trying to strike a balance here between all of the objectives of what everybody had. And this was handed to us. We certainly didn't initiate this. One key thing that we've had repeatedly questioned from the districts, there is no exception in the transfer rule that would allow a student who's already played to transfer to another school because they do or do not offer the SSYP year. I know that was a concern. Your boards can make a pure decision based on what your district wants to do and not feel like you're going to lose a bunch of kids because they get an automatic waiver. Now, they may move, and we are already experiencing what I will call the silly season. We have a number of people right now who are changing schools to be enrolled at a school by May 1st that they expect to honor the SSYP part of this law. Where you are enrolled May 1st is where you have the option to take this year. And we have asked the sponsor no less than a dozen times to make sure that was our understanding because we are putting that out on top of the mountain. So basically where they are the first is their opportunity to take advantage of that. My understanding, and I do not work for KDE, there was a very confusing piece in the original KDE guidance last week that allowed that to be extended, but that's for the purpose, the sentence was intended for the purpose that you've always had as districts promotion and retention control, and you maintain that control after May 1st. It's not necessarily how it came out in their guidance. My understanding is they are revising that for their 2.0 guidance. I can't speak for them. But I know that you continue to have that option within the law. None of that part of the law changed, but May 1st was the deadline for these kids. So a student who, let me tell you where this is going to impact you in the districts. I have a student who decides he wants to come to one of Mr. Gillum's schools in Madison County. And he decides on April 30th that he's going to do that. And Madison County's board approves the SSYP. This student will still have to deal with the transfer rule and whether or not they met all of those exceptions. But if they are eligible and his district approves the SSYP, all of these exceptions in this document come true. There is no marriage of the transfer rule and the SSYP. Okay, so they're still going to have to legitimately meet the transfer restrictions. We've had a number of your peers who are concerned about people bailing out because of your decision one way or the other on SSYP. And we're trying to not be the cause of that. Now, one thing that's an unintended consequence, and I say this because David's a former high school AD in Madison County. Previously, a foreign exchange student coming into your district had 1 year to play if they were there on an approved exchange program. If they were there in 2021, that year will be extended to 21-22 under the provisions of this bill. So that may be just 5 kids in the entire state. But if you get a kid whose agency approves them staying on for another year because they didn't get the quote full experience of being an exchange student in a Kentucky school, that student would get that year extended as well. So that's the reference to bylaw 7. Here's another one that may catch you on an athletic side. And again, we are trying desperately we want you to be able to make these decisions irrespective of athletics, but we know what your communities are doing to you right now. They're burning us up too. They're burning our phones up too. Bylaw 9 says that once a student has played in the 9th grade, then they cannot play on an outside team in the fall. That will be waived for the SSYP kids who repeat 9th grade because they are to be considered as though it's their first time in 9th grade. They are repeating 9th grade. So they don't get penalized because of what they did during this false start year or whatever name you want to use. So again, we don't want people making the pro or con decision based on our rules. The last one that I want to highlight before I go through a couple of examples and then throw it open for anything that Chad or myself or any of the superintendents have anything they want to say is the impact on 14. We based our original guidance on what came out from KDE as far as graduating students and striking that line between dual enrollment and dual credit. We talked to KHEAA yesterday, and they're cleaning up some of their communication as well. The 3 agencies are working very well together, trying to be sure that we're not the cause of problems with this bill. So basically, we remind you that graduated students per the bill are considered to be secondary students, provided that you are still giving them education. Okay, and that's where you've got the challenge of, is it supplemental, is it continual, et cetera. Okay, and I'm sorry we can't answer that part. As far as bylaw 14 goes, if you are allowing a 12th grader to continue to go to school under this, then they will not be considered a graduate for the purpose of bylaw 14. Historically, if we would have considered them a graduate, they're no longer eligible to play. Well, that defeats the purpose of allowing the seniors the option that the legislature wanted them to have. So I realize that may not be an answer you all wanted to hear, but again, that needs to be an education-based decision, not an athletics decision. Now, let me get to the conversation I had with Tim Schlosser this morning. I think a lot of you have probably thought about it as well, but Tim broke it down. As old football guys, we had to break it down real low so we could really understand it, and we understood each other. This is not really a problem in 21-22. You're going to find a way to craft what is supplemental. You're going to find a way through the Department of Ed to work what is continuing. Where we really see this being an issue that the legislature might have to clean up, let me take that student in Dave Gillum's district who is a sophomore right now and who has taken sophomore English and all the other sophomore classes and done fairly well. So supplemental, he moves on to junior, but he stays his junior year. In the next year, which was his 4th year, he moves to senior, and now he gets ready for his 5th, and you have your whole menu already exhausted. You're done. You've offered him everything you can offer. What are we going to offer that kid in the future that can continue to have him considered to be enrolled at your place, even if it's dual enrolled or dual accredited with a college? And that's something that KHEAA, CPE, and the legislature, KHEAA, excuse me, and the legislature are probably going to have to work together on a change in the 22 session. The problem, that's really more a down the road problem. We think that you all are already working on alternative answers that will help with the 2021-22 problems. But it's what happens when that kid back at Bath County exhausted every option Nancy had. They're done. We got every class we can offer. We partner with Moorhead. We got everything we can offer, and still they're still in school by virtue of this bill. So we're going to have to figure that academic side. And for us, they're not too old. That kid could exist. You could have that kid who was not held back in early grades, holds back this year. They're still just 18 in the summer. They've not aged out. So this thing will live with us for a while. Couple of points on records, Nancy, and then I'll be glad to throw it open. Chad has interpreted, and I think we've had a lot of consultation with KDE where they agree. Records involving students that are utilizing this SSYP or supplementary school year program are considered protected education records. We've had a lot of requests from the media that we denote who these kids are on our rosters, kind of like a red shirt freshman on the college roster or something. We view that as a protected record of an 18-year-old and under. I think the Department of Ed agrees with that too. You will have to report those through our roster system. They'll be marked, but that will not be a published report and will not be public information. It'll be just like the transfer forms, due process papers, et cetera. Chad, is there anything you want to interject? I know we've got a couple of board councils on here. Is there anything else you want to interject on the records piece?
No, I think that's exactly the way we're going to handle any open records request is that those are protected records under FERPA and the state version KFERPA. And yeah, I think that's the way that I would advise board council to start their analysis and their discussions.
One of the other things that I think we'd all probably be remiss if we didn't acknowledge, we're all going to get asked how many people did this. And we'll be able to provide that data in aggregate, and you probably will too. And if we go back to the legislature asking for cleanup on the 5th year students and what they can take academically, they're going to want to know, well, how many does this affect? How many really did it? And if statewide we say there's 3 people, they're probably not going to pass a bill. If statewide we say it's 3,000 people, they might start talking to us. And I don't think it's going to get that high. I'm hoping the number's in between. But because I think, as you know, when the legislature asked the Department of Ed about the cost of this long-term and the fact the state is funding these kids, as Chuck said, the back of the envelope math said it's an indeterminable amount. So I think they're going to really want to know these counts also for the purpose of knowing what the budget looks like and how many people they're holding accountable for this. So we will be keeping those records. If they're not marked as such on our rosters, they are not eligible. So you will have to keep these records for our purposes. And I think the department will probably say the same thing. Now, for answering questions for your constituents, yes, there are NCAA implications. We don't have control over the NCAA rules. We barely have control over ours. So, but I will say that the NCAA has said as of today, their initial eligibility determination continues to be on the first 4 years from the time a student enrolls in grade 9. So Tim Crawford has a student in one of his districts who is a 5th year SSYP student next year that took a class that he got an F in this year. Let's say he failed it and suddenly makes an A. The NCAA will not replace that grade. That's separate and apart from the grade point arguments you're having with our state. This is the NCAA. They will not replace that grade for the purpose of calculating their core GPA and their first year eligibility. They're not going to count credits that come in late. Now, they may change their mind. If enough states do this, they may change their mind. But as of yet, we're by ourselves. So as of yet, we're the only one that's passed this. I don't know that they'll make that change, but we will monitor it. And we do have links to 2 documents online for people to take a look at. Clarification yesterday, again, summarized, I did it in the bylaw 4, so I'll go quicker. The enrollment status as dual enrolled or dual credit is not a factor in athletic eligibility. It is not a factor. That's an issue for you all to work out. If Mr. Fletcher has to figure out a way in Lawrence County for those students to be seniors that have met the requirements, but I got to find a way to get them 4 hours, that's going to be considered his issue, not an issue for KHEAA or KDE as far as dual enrolled and dual credit. He's got to find them 4 hours that they can be taking and be approved. Okay, so we've kind of purified that. The seniors are allowed to take advantage of this. And that was 100% the sponsor's intention, is that anybody from K through 12 that wanted a chance to have a do-over gets a chance. You'll probably find what we're hearing all over the state. The kids are not near as interested as the parents are in this. And all of us are simply trying to answer their question. The kids have a foot out the door already. But I know you're getting pounded by questions. We did get a very specific question. That was a good one. We have schools that have started spring football practice. A lot of that started this week. Could they practice? So let me use Mr. Fletcher, Dr. Fletcher as an example. In his district, let's say they started spring football practice this week, and he's got seniors that are going to come back that have indicated to the board that they're going to come back. So they've got something in writing, an email, a form, however your district's handling it. Okay, they've got the indication. We're going to turn them loose to practice spring football. The board votes on it and the board votes no. They're now done practicing spring football. The same would go for cheer and dance, which has a spring tryout window for the following year. They have an early tryout window because of all the summer camps, et cetera. So basically, you're going to be able to say if they told you they're coming back as seniors, they get a chance to do this. But if your board then says no, okay, you got to take them down. You're done, because they're realistically not going to be able to do it next year. So we did have that very specific question about seniors. We've also had the interesting question. We have one district that anticipates, it's a small school, and they anticipate a fairly large portion of their senior class wanting to take advantage of this SSYP year. Well, we did remind them that for 2021-22, your second month enrollment figures will be the enrollment figures for both the current year and 21-22 in terms of looking at classification for football, track, and cross country. So this school is kind of worried that suddenly might put them into AA football. And I told them that's an issue their board has to think about, because if they're available to play, they count. So, and we did not have, as you all know, we did not have official second month enrollment figures for this year by virtue of state decisions. So next year is going to count twice. So that is just something we were asked. So Nancy, that kind of details the various questions we've been asked. And I know Dr. Fletcher was the first one that I saw a hand raise early on. Don't know if we got to you, Robbie, but if we didn't, we're here for however long you need.
Sounds good. Robbie, Dr. Fletcher, are you still on there?
Yeah, thanks. Julian, you did an awesome job going through everything, and you answered I think every single question I had. There's only one clarification that I need, and I want to go back to your example that you did with Mr. Schlosser there at Simpson County.
Yep.
You got your ninth grade student that has moved along with their class. They didn't repeat anything. They've moved along. They're going to graduate in 4 years, but they still want that supplemental year. So just from a sports aspect, that child is still eligible in that 5th year. Is that correct?
Well, as of now, it's a bit dangling. Okay, when we're talking 4 years from now, because there's the very real possibility that you run out of approved curriculum offerings and can't guarantee they're full-time enrolled, because we're going to tell you they're eligible as long as they're full-time enrolled. So they're going to have to come up with some cleanup to this that allows you to count, whether it's dual enroll, whether it's dual credit, allows you, whatever. The legislature is probably going to have to contemplate and figure what an answer 2 and 3 and 4 years from now would be to letting them be counted. In the bill specifically, it says the 21-22 credits are to be counted even if they're supplemented. So we've got to try to, they're going to have to extend that beyond 21-22 to close a loophole.
So essentially, if they take full schedule in that 5th year, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. As long as they take 4 hours. Yes, sir.
Well, the only other, and you can't answer this, but for those that are on here, probably the biggest thing is from my community is they want around this dual credit, dual enrollment. So, and I'd be happy for any superintendent to give me a call and see their views on this, but we don't have to discuss it here. But I'm going to throw it out there is, I've got a lot of parents that are asking me, can we just skip our English class? Can we just retake our English class? Then when it gets to be our 4th year, our students' 4th year, they're taking junior English. So the only thing they're going to be taking in the 5th year would be their senior English. So what they're trying to do there, and everybody on here probably figured that out, is they still want the dual credit rate in that 5th year. So that's if anybody's got the answer to that, if you want to send it my way, I'd appreciate it. But that's the big thing I'm getting from the community. You've answered everything else. As long as I can find classes for them to be fully enrolled in that 5th year, so they could be athletic eligible. So everything else, Julian, I think you did a phenomenal job. Thank you very much.
I will tell you this, Doc, those are the exact points you brought up that Tim talked about this morning as well. And it's going to require not only changes related to the SSYP, but probably CPE, probably some other things. There's going to be a ton of little things. Chad and I were kind of intrigued last week when the department's guidance came out, it referenced dual credit, dual enrollment. So we looked up the 2 statutes. They're about 3 pages. But there's about 900 pages of regulations that attach to those statutes that somebody's going to have to sort through to figure all of this out. And I hope you guys, as the education leaders, curriculum leaders, can help lead that effort, not be led and pulled.
Commissioner Tackett, Dr. Fletcher, I just wanted to make sure I kind of mentioned, Dr. Fletcher, with your example, I think for those students, you definitely want to make sure that you're documenting that next year is going to be an SSYP year in their records. That needs to be established under the bill too. So just making sure that they're going through meeting that May 1st requirement, and the school district is taking the action commensurate with what the language of 128. I think we want to make sure we have those records complete as well as we look at that down the repercussions that are going to occur the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year.
Can I ask Dr. Crawford or Tim Crawford a question? I got a real question, and this is just for a little levity, okay? Tim posts some of the prettiest pictures of nice after-hours relaxation. Do you talk like a lawyer 24/7 like Chad does, or do you actually talk like a person sometimes? I just wondered, just based on that last comment.
I tell people I am not a lawyer. That's how I pay the bills.
There you go.
I think that's the worst. I think I got set up there because that might be the worst setup that I've had in a while.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, Julian, that Chad does a good job of setting himself up on a daily basis. I had 8 years experience with that on the board.
There's not a lot of people that can throw their own alley-oop and dunk it. I mean, he sets himself up and then dunks it. I've never seen anything like it.
I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Nancy, you all have been in on some of these other meetings. I would ask, Cold Iron, some of the others that are on here. I mean, is there anything? This seems to be recurring themes. It's around the dual enrollment, the cost of classes, the dual credit. It's cheaper. The whole that seems to be superintendent statewide theme. That's thematic to what the real issues are that are kind of outside of us.
Right. Yes. Anyone else have something specific? I know, that was, and Julian, some of your information yesterday was, it was intriguing too, but I think today you've been able to talk a little bit more explicitly and pin down some of those specific questions. Does anyone else have a question? Jonathan Jett from Perry County. Good morning.
Good morning. This is just to follow up on Robbie's question. And I was at the end of a phone call when you started talking, Robbie, but were you saying once they get to their senior year, the only class they would have
Sean Horn, okay.
would be English 4 that they would need?
You know, I've talked to a lot of different, Jonathan, I've talked to a lot of different districts, and the big question there has been if a student just simply repeats their, let's say a sophomore repeats sophomore English.
Right.
So they go into their 4th year and they're taking junior English. So the only thing they got in their 5th year is senior English. So technically those students are seniors in their 5th year, so they could take dual credit classes. That's the clarification. And parents are coming up with, you know, they're finding ways to get around. They want to be able to take the dual credit classes for the 40% tuition rates. You know, as far as this supplemental year, all my parents that are wanting to do this want to play sports, but they also want that added benefit of being able to take those dual credit classes at 40% in their 5th year, if that makes sense.
And the way I interpret that is everybody would be eligible for that except this year's seniors, because they would have been graduated. The others that repeat 9, 10, and 11, they won't be graduated until after that 5th year. So they should be eligible for the discounted rate. That's the way I interpret it.
I agree with you, Jonathan. The only way is this year's senior class would have to actually fail a requirement before they could actually be a senior in the 5th year.
And I think that would make them ineligible possibly because they're not graduated, because in order to be eligible as a senior this year, they have to have been graduated to play that 5th year. That's the way I interpret it. So if they failed, I don't think they would be eligible.
That's a question for Julian. Julian, how is that?
If they're utilizing the SSYP, then the repeating provision goes away, because theoretically every student is playing while repeating. So even a senior that's repeating. So I don't think it's called just to those that have met graduation requirements. The original part of the bill, if you recall, was just about seniors, and then they expanded it to be K through 12. And as the repeating, you are normally automatically ineligible by state regulation if you're repeating, and that had to be waived as well because of this bill.
But and I understand that, but the term graduated is
right.
why I interpret it that they must have successfully completed. And I could be misinterpreting that too. Yeah. But another question I have, or a concern I have, and it's not for the KHSAA, but it goes back to allocations for me. And can students change their mind? I know we say they have to notify by May the 1st, but is that set in stone? Because if it's not, then I get in a situation where at one of my large K-8 schools, if I have 15 or 20 8th graders say they're going to repeat, and I base the allocation on that, then that school may pick up a teacher. Now, if in June those kids come back and say, well, we've changed our mind, we're going to go on to high school, then I've overstaffed my K-8 school, and now I have to add an additional teacher, at least one, to the high school. So a group of 15 or 20 kids could impact allocations, 1 or 2 at an elementary school, and you can't take it back once you give the allocation. And then I'm going to have to add potentially 1 or 2 at the high school. So when we talk about unintended consequences, that's a big one that I don't think has really been looked at or addressed. And if anybody has any suggestions on that, or is it set in stone? Once they fill out that form May the 1st, can they not change their mind? Because I haven't heard anybody discuss that either.
Well, we've had that come up in conversation. I would call on, just because Chad and Tim are 2 of the early people on my screen, but when we ask repeatedly during the session, we ask LRC staff and we ask the senator, the deadline to request yes is in stone, May 1st. But there is no, you can't change your mind provision. That was a vulnerability that was left, and that has been noted in several calls, Jonathan, that could very well be the issue, is that you have 30 say yes, and they all get together one night at the Little League Park and change their mind, and you're stuck with your allocation decisions. Now, what I did hear the other day, and Wayne might be a good resource, you know, Tim, you've done this, you and Chad too, is part of the board's approval policy might address that. In other words, remember, the boards have to take individual action to approve this, And I have heard from at least 2 superintendents that their boards are going to put it out there that you have the irrevocable decision deadline of, but that's their board policy, not part of the statute. The statute did not say that.
Yeah, Julian, I think there's been a lot of discussions about, your boards and the decision makers along with board council are going to have to get together and craft these policies that are going to be very specific to the district and how they're going to implement this program. And I think I'm hearing a lot of discussion as we go forward. There's not going to be a one size fits all approach here, and you're going to have to tailor it for each school district, given your local situation.
And I don't know, Tim, if you've talked to KSBA, I don't know if in their model policies, they're talking about addressing this or not. But that would be a heck of a suggestion for members.
I've heard at least 2 different organizations talking about trying to get some model policies together in that regards, Commissioner.
The last time I talked to John Fogel at KSBA, he said, since this is a 1-year deal, they are not going to be drafting proposed policies and procedures.
Okay.
And then the alternative then is every district's going to have to come up with their implementation plan as opposed to a policy to use under SB128. And also, you may know, but I thought I heard part of a question earlier, we do have a statute that says once a student qualifies and meets state and local graduation requirements, they shall be issued a diploma. So your seniors, once they qualify for graduation, have to be issued a diploma. So if they repeat next year, then the only thing you can do, you can't change any of their transcripts, their GPA or the grade courses. You just add to the transcript for informational purposes, whatever credits they took next year.
Hey, Tim, this is Sean Horn. This kind of ties into the question that I had. And Julian, you might be able to help out with this. We have a couple of seniors that could potentially opt in and decide to do this supplemental year, and they are athletes. What's to keep in both cases, both students have met the graduation requirements for our school district. So just like you said, they're a graduate, they're going to qualify. What's to keep that student that might be a fall sport student to initially do the fall sport and then say at Christmas, say, I'm good. What would that, I really don't know what to do with that. That's the one thing I keep coming back to. What can we dangle to hold them accountable? My assumption is if they come back and do a supplemental year, that'll be for the entire school year. But if they're already a graduate and have met the requirements that we have set in policy, what do we do with that?
There's nothing in the statute that indicates they can't change their mind at any point in time after May 1st. Now, one thing you may do to try to encourage them to do that is whatever plan you come up with, put in there, the request has to mean that they want to stay the whole year and complete both semesters.
And Tim, that's what we've heard. That's what we've heard from more than one. We've got a little bit from the athletic side, a little bit more of a safeguard on the spring kids because of having to be enrolled in the fall than we do the fall kids just bailing out after the fall. That is a vulnerability that's been identified the entire time. And like you said, Tim, it may come down to the implementation plans. It may come down to what's said in the district. I know that it was clarified for you all, I believe it the very first time it was talked about, that they need to stay the entire year for SEEK purposes. I think that was clarified from one of the earlier calls. But so I think there's going to be a tangled web that tries to mandate that you keep them all year, but then they're going to turn it over to you to find a way to do that.
But hypothetically, just so that I'm clear, if a kid is a graduate, they decide to come back, they're a fall sport athlete, that's their sport, they do the sport, and they do decide to opt out. We really don't, aside from trying to set something, local decision, set something in stone, we can't force them to come back the second half of the year, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I mean, we can do everything we can to put in line, but there's nothing that would require them to come back.
For your, if it's a graduated senior, there's nothing in the statute or KDE guidance that says that, they can't change their mind. This wouldn't be an issue for a non-graduated student.
Correct.
then that'd be true.
Correct. That's the hangup that I'm having, because not that it would happen, but I'm just trying to play hypotheticals, and I know how that's going to be perceived from a community perspective. But that's really going to put us in a bad spot if you know, you have a kid and then they change their mind and say, you know, I've done my extra football season and I'm not coming back.
And from an athletics perspective, Sean, it's not any different really than a kid who at the end of his normal senior year bails out at Christmas and reports early to college. So from an athletic standpoint, it's transparent, but I see your dilemma academically and funding wise.
Listen, guys, I appreciate the feedback and help with the issues I had.
Any other questions that we have for Julian or Chad or Tim?
Tim, if you wouldn't mind, probably the biggest question, again, going back to what I said a little bit earlier, and this is out of the realm of sports, but is that kid that repeats, I mean, we're going to have some kids that don't want to repeat anything. And they progress on, they graduate in 4 years. But I mean, are districts requiring kids to repeat something at least? I guess that's my big question. How many districts out there are requiring students to at least repeat one class?
Well, the way the statute reads right now in section 2 says the 21-22 school year is a supplemental school year to, quote, retake or supplement the courses or the grades the students have already taken. So we know what retake means. They take that same course over. You know, the question is going to be is how do you want to define supplemental courses that they've already taken? So we either have to repeat the same course or you have to have some supplement related to a course taken. And that's the statutory language.
Probably heard the best idea from one of the superintendents on this call, and I don't think you can do it, but basically said make them take the same thing again, but this year's credit doesn't count. They got to earn it next year. But you know, you're going to have to. I think that they're going to come up with some guidance from Frankfurt on what supplemental is. You heard the discussion. Matter of fact, I think you heard the commissioner make a statement and change his mind yesterday in the superintendent's call. So I think they're hurriedly trying to get you a clarification on that piece. But Tim's quoting exactly what we've been quoting.
Exactly, Julian. And we had this discussion yesterday. Some of us did. How do you repeat something that you've had? I mean, it would almost like be an audit, really, I guess, audit the class.
Yep.
Tim and I kind of were talking about the language of that piece, but a supplement class. I mean, if you had British Lit as English 4, which is what goes on in English 4, you could do a British Lit 2, a supplement class, or a composition or a portfolio class, something else as a supplement. Require that, couldn't you? Would that work, Tim?
Yeah. My personal opinion is you have to have a nexus. That is, you got to have a connection. So whatever the supplemental course is has a connection relating back to a course they've already taken. So what
right.
you would be, they've taken that course this year. So if you want to supplement that with something, I would say that's a supplemental course.
It's going to have to be something related to that course.
You know, if you took British Lit this year, I don't think Russian Lit would supplement.
No.
Next year.
You know, I have to call it almost like a 2 or, you know, something else.
Yeah,
any other questions?
Nancy, I was just going to say, but don't you all agree that probably from the high school standpoint, I don't see any high school kid that's not honestly interested in sports wanting to stay and repeat a year. So if it is athletes that's doing this, then the grade rule and stuff is what's going to get them, regardless of whether or not they're taking the class for credit this year or next year. I'm the one that always said it should be that they should be taking the class over for credit this year. But they're still going to have to be graded. They're still going to have grades. They're going to have to be passing 4 of those grades to be eligible to play football. this fall. So technically, regardless of which grade counts, it's mainly going to be athletes. I think when you talk about K through 8, we don't have an issue with K through 8 kids. I mean, I think it's going to be 9 through 12 kids that this is creating the issue with. There'll be a few things with middle school regulations, but don't you all think that, I mean, really from that standpoint, we're not going to have a ton of high school kids and parents walking, oh, I want them to repeat their freshman year. It's just not going to happen. There's a reason why they're going to want to repeat, and that's athletics. So if you really get past this as an education bill and put it really what it is, I don't think we're going to have trouble anyway. I mean, would you all agree with that?
And Jeff, your problem that you illustrate is exacerbated by what's going on at the college level, by the fact that they're going to recruit from each other through the transfer portal now, and they've been off the road recruiting. They've not been able to see people in person for a year. It's our high school kids that the parents are seeing the desperation of they're getting left out. The parents that envision their kid as a D1 athlete when they might not start for some of your rivals. That's the challenge you've got. It's going to come down to the athletes getting the spotlight for the problem.
Yep. That's it. Brandy had a good comment. She said, if the NCAA is only taking the first 8 semesters, we need to be careful about the eligibility and what courses each school has submitted to the eligibility center for approval. That's a valid point.
Very good point. Mm-hmm. We do have a meeting Thursday with the NCAA Initial Center, and I will hope to have a guidance letter that coming from them that we can send out to you all that helps a little bit in that regard too.
Good deal. This has been great. Very timely, and we appreciate, Julian, you doing this exclusively for KEDC, and we are appreciative of everyone's time, and we will keep it at an hour, and that's what we said. So anybody else? Okay, everybody have a great day. Thank you. And Julian, appreciate you. Chad, everybody. Thanks,
Thank
Supers.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.